From the great researcher of creativity, Edward de Bono, I quote, "Creative thinking is not a talent. It is a skill that can be learned. It empowers people by adding strength to their natural abilities, which improves teamwork, productivity, and, where appropriate, profits." End quote. Why do so many songwriters make incredibly good songs when they're young, but then write such disappointing work later in life? And at the other end, why is it practically unheard of for a young kid to make brilliantly crafted songs? 1. The reason for this is that creativity is a process rather than an innate character attribute. When we encounter beautiful works of art and clever inventions, it's easy to be so captivated as to forget that behind their creation is years of learning and tinkering, trying and failing. What may be innate is the creator's aesthetic sensitivity, her eye for style, but whether or not that tastefulness is a display of genius is merely a matter of opinion. There is a side to creativity that involves skill, and that skill is not innate. It is developed through a long process. One of the key attributes that leads to a better outcome in innovation is the ability to work through agonizing periods of uncertainty. Innovation happens more effectively when people work for longer at finding a solution. The need to appear quick-minded is the biggest killer of creativity. Those who are willing to tinker for longer are far more likely to produce a better outcome, all other conditions being equal. The creative process requires the willingness to switch between what are often referred to as the open state and the closed state. In the open state, the innovator is considering all options, no matter how absurd. There are no boundaries set in the open state. This is the time for trial and error, and a willingness to appear a little crazy. It is a time to let the mind roam freely before boundaries are selected to form the closed state. The narrowing of boundaries in the closed state is a necessary part of the process as it eases mental processing. For example, if members of a rock band have no idea what sort of vibe they're going for, it will be difficult for them to get anything out at all. It is important to form questions, function statements, etc., that set a clear guideline for the desired outcome. Otherwise, mental energy will be dissipated so much so that, realistically, the work will never be produced. Still, the function statement, or questions posed, should be left as open as possible in relation to the desired outcome to avoid prematurely constricting the options. In the lifespan of the innovator, the creative process flows through an apprenticeship phase, be it a formal or informal apprenticeship, followed by a tinkering phase, then an incubation phase, and finally, the insight comes. Let's break the creative process down into 4 phases: the apprenticeship phase, the tinkering phase, the incubation phase, and the insight phase. Now let's consider the apprenticeship phase. During the apprenticeship phase, the mind is primed for future innovation through the learning of skills and by developing a depth of understanding that allows the apprentice to navigate his field. He learns what has worked and what has not worked in that field. He learns which areas within that narrow field need solutions and thus finds areas within it to focus his energy on. By developing a unique range of skills, the apprentice is much more likely to produce unique solutions in his attempts to tackle problems. Typically, in both science and art, innovations have been created through influence from other fields and, usually by mistake, through play. For example, Velcro was invented by Georges de Mistral when he found he was getting burdock seeds, cobbler's pegs, stuck to his clothes while hiking. And in music, most fresh sounds are made by combining an unusual array of influences from different genres. The music of Mozart, who was actually a highly skilled billiard player, had been influenced partly by the click of billiard balls as they bounced around the table. It should be added also that unique situations and unique relationships between people are important factors that often lead to innovation by providing unusual input and thus leading to unique ideas. What is also important during the apprenticeship phase is that the aspiring innovator does not label himself prematurely, as that would stunt creativity by preventing the apprentice from ever applying his knowledge to other fields where it would provide fresh input. The apprenticeship phase is about learning skills through intensive immersion within a field. That expertise is then complemented by input from other learning, which usually occurs during leisure time. The apprenticeship phase forms the foundation for a productive tinkering phase. Now let's consider the tinkering phase. It is in the tinkering phase that a deeper exploration takes place. This is where the innovator is venturing into the great unknown as he follows his curiosity. Where in the apprenticeship phase, he was only venturing into territory that was unknown to himself. During the tinkering phase, he may be exploring what is unknown to humanity altogether. This requires a persistent acceptance of uncertainty. The innovator may ride with uncertainty in this way for years on end before he has anything to show for the time he has invested in the pursuit. The need for certainty is what prevents most people from ever doing anything particularly innovative in their lifetimes in any area of life. It seems we all have a deep fear of the unknown. But if we are to be innovative at all, we do need to take the plunge into the unknown. The need for certainty, and to be doing what is already considered to be valid, puts a closed door on innovation. During the tinkering phase, the innovator is not just tinkering physically with tools and works, but also mentally with his perception of the situation. By loosening up his perception of what he's dealing with, the tinkerer is able to open his mind to receiving a vast array of ideas from the unconscious. For example, an innovative guitarist may see his guitar as a block of wood with strings across it. This way of seeing it opens up his perception of what a guitar is and how it should or could be played. In this way, the guitarist's perception of his instrument is freed from the constraints imposed by authority, knowledge, and prestige. The tinkering stage is the time to become aware of those prematurely defined limitations lingering in the back of the mind. These are uncovered through a process of experimentation and self-questioning. The innovator provokes the arrival of new ideas and methods by turning things on their heads, playing with absurd possibilities, and putting himself in strange situations. Even limitations themselves can lead to new possibilities. Some of the most unique music I've ever heard was created by people who refused to use anything but a single instrument to create an entire album. With limited resources, the innovator can be forced into a situation where he will focus purely on the fundamental aim. This, in some cases, can lead to simpler and more effective ways of doing things than having limitless possibilities ever would have. In short, the tinkering phase of the creative process requires the courage to persevere through the discomfort of uncertainty and the potential for failure. The innovator plays at solving the problem in an interplay between the conscious and the unconscious mind. Finally, when his intellect is exhausted, he gives up. Then, usually without knowing it, he has entered the incubation phase of the creative process. The incubation phase. Self-doubt is an important and inevitable part of the creative process. In the incubation phase, the innovator is coming to terms with the blow to his ego, which he has just endured. He questions the worthiness of his work. He is likely questioning whether it was even a worthwhile task to pursue to begin with. Having been defeated by the task, the innovator will often take up something new or go on a holiday to ease the stress of having failed at something so core to his identity. Unbeknown to the innovator, however, the creative process is still continuing. His holiday is a part of the process itself. It's often said in creative fields, if you want to solve a problem, get it away from your heart. Since desire leads to distortion of perception, the innovator becomes like the monkey holding the banana mentioned in my video on detachment from the master identity. He clings so tightly to the aim that he cannot see the situation clearly. It's like looking at something with your eyes too close to it. Vision is obscured and the matter is not seen for what it is. From a further distance, however, the situation may be easier to navigate. And so, the intuitive leap may come when he least expects it, after he thought the task had been left to defeat. The next phase of creative process is the insight phase. When the insight finally comes, there remain two pitfalls to be aware of. The first is that it may actually be wrong. Creative thinkers like Faraday, Huxley, Darwin, Planck, Einstein, and Poincaré have all said that flashes of intuitive insight can sometimes be incorrect. Einstein himself claimed he lost 2 years of hard work to a false inspiration. Even if the unconscious intelligence is unfathomably deep, I think it's important to remember that we are interpreting its expressions or signals with the very limited conscious mind as our receiver. The second pitfall is to believe that the insight is wrong, or that it is invalid or too controversial to be accepted. In many situations, an innovation will appear to be so absurd that it will be disregarded by the innovator's peers or even by the innovator himself. One of the world's most esteemed scientists, V.S. Ramachandran, when questioned about the creative process he went through that led to unusual but effective treatments using mirrors to treat stroke sufferers and people with phantom limbs, responded by saying, "I always tell my students some of the most amazing discoveries have come from jokes. They started out as a joke, the very idea of a mirror to treat 1/6 of mankind. 1/6 of mankind suffers a stroke. It's so outrageous, people would just discard it for that reason." End quote. Another excellent example of this is the famous story of when, in 1846, the Hungarian doctor Ignaz Semmelweis first discovered that deaths due to puerperal fever could be dramatically reduced if the hospital staff washed their hands before delivering babies. He was ridiculed by his peers. Fortunately for us, those thinkers both went ahead with the research, despite that they would be seen as being crazy. To hear more of this series on mastery and creativity, please hit like and subscribe. Thanks for listening.